All right, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners, we are back, and man, have we got a good one to unpack here today. For those who, I don't know, it's been probably a couple months ago, I had Ken Nixon, Marvin Cotton Jr., and Eric Anderson. They were in town in St. Louis to help support Lamar Johnson. And he's since been freed, by the way, which is a fantastic thing if anybody followed that in the St. Louis area. But Ken was on, and we had a panel discussion about people who are exonerated. And Ken has just one heck of a story. He did 16 years out of he was sentenced for life without parole. I think they gave him 2 life sentences just to make sure that he punctuated it. But he just never gave up, and he's doing really good things now that I want to unpack with him. I was just telling him before we got on that I was just kind of getting more and more agitated the more I read through his case last night, and it's just one thing after another thing after. You got the jailhouse snitch, and there's all kinds of reasons why that's bad. And then you've got the witness that changes his story 2 or 3 times, and then you've got the lead detective that says in a memo that, well, we got the wrong guy, but they just proceeded anyway. We're going to unpack all this. This is a story that you wonder how in the world it got this far out of whack, but then to have, and I was telling Ken before we got on, he's such a great voice and he's doing great things. He's only been out since 2021 and he's already making an impact for people who've been incarcerated, making their lives easier and getting out. He's working with legislation on doing that too, and he's carrying a lot of responsible titles to use his story, use his experience to make things happen. Before we unpack everything, I want to recognize our sponsor for the show, Auto Plaza Direct. Nobody likes going and spending a couple weekends walking the lot, looking for a car. Then you have to go and spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership just to buy that car. Well, it's kind of like a trip to the dentist. Nobody really likes a trip to the dentist. Well, there's a better way. Take all this away from you, the pain, the hassle of getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just let them know the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go out and find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price and deliver that car to you wherever you are. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Autoplazadirect.com. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. All right, let's jump into this, guys. Ken Nixon, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So like I said, Ken, I've reading through your story and the nightmare that you went through. It's just, I think it's probably everybody's nightmare. I can't imagine a worse nightmare of not having any idea, minding your own business, being at home. You own a house, you've got a kid, you just started a new job, you got a new business you started, and then boom, your whole life changes. It's the worst kind of change in the whole world because when it happens, you don't even know what it is. But before we get into all that, let's unpack a little bit what Ken growing up, Ken, being a kid and going to school, what was your life before this nightmare happened? What was going on with you?
Prior to this happening, I was pretty average American kid, I guess you can say. 2-parent household, middle class, magnet schools for much of my school age career. I got bored right somewhere between 10th and 11th grade. School wasn't challenging me. I literally finished school with 11th grade credits. I never even bothered to register myself for 12th grade credits. It was just, I mean, it wasn't appealing to me anymore at that point. Like somewhere between 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, it just started to get boring. It wasn't challenging in any kind of way. I felt weird because I wasn't being challenged in school. My parents didn't have an answer. So I was like, you know what, screw school. I actually, at that time, the GED test was a 5-part test. I took the first 3 parts. I didn't know when I called to schedule it that it was a 2-day test. So I went the first day thinking I was just going to do all 5 parts. I got there, they told me, no, you can only do 3 today and 2 tomorrow. So excuse me, I took the 3 parts. Didn't know that I had passed them until later on. I never went back the second day to take the last 2 parts. Prior to that, after that, following that, I started my own towing company. College was something that I always wanted to do. I was never really a troubled kid. You know, I didn't have a lot of run-ins with law enforcement besides traffic tickets. You know, I was a kid with a lead foot and
Yeah.
access to cars. So, you know, I was driving all over the place, doing everything I could. Caught a bunch of traffic tickets, but never actually made it to the courtroom. Um, Beyond that, you know, once I started my company, that was my focus. And then my son came in 2004. And, you know, that was really where my mind was, you know, making sure that this business got off the ground, making sure that my son was fed and taken care of. Just really try to build a platform for him to kind of take off and be secure in his future.
Well, it's interesting too, Ken. You weren't very old. I mean, you're 19 years old. I mean, you're starting a business. You've got a kid. Got a new house. You're really kind of setting your way to take off. Can you lead us through when the nightmare happened for you?
Yeah. So, yes, you are correct. I was really young. A lot of people around me would always praise me for being ahead of my time and my thinking and
Yeah,
the way that
that's what I
I
was thinking. Yeah.
I did hang around with quite a few older people that were very friendly with information, right? Nobody withheld information. They were all willing to coach me and guide me. When I asked questions, they were willing to answer. If they didn't have the answer, they showed me how to get it, which is, you know, how I got the house and how I got the company. It was people around me that walked me through those processes willingly, right?
Yeah.
Willingly, to make sure that I had what was necessary to build a solid foundation for myself and my family. Um, the night of the incident, and it's ironic that the name of the podcast is Nightmare for Success. It was literally a nightmare. The crime happened that night. I was asleep. It was a normal day. You know, that prior day was a normal day for me, working really hard. I had my son with me most of the day. We were towing cars and, you know, fixing flats and, you know, just
Yeah.
being the service provider that, you know, I had set out to be. And I go home at the end of the night and, you know, it's again a normal night. And I fall asleep. And the very next morning, I wake up to a loud noise. And before I realized it, there was an assault rifle and people with tactical gear in my home, you know, with rifles pointed at me. That was the beginning of the nightmare.
What in the world was going through your mind? I mean, a no knock, knock the world down in your place. Everybody's asleep. You've got I think if I remember, it was your son and your girlfriend, the three of you in there.
Yes.
What in the world what were you thinking?
Panic immediately.
Yeah.
The way the house was structured, the bedroom that we were sleeping in was not far from the front door. I mean, there's a wall dividing. So, you know, you have to go around the wall to turn and go to the living room area. But the front window of the bedroom faced the front porch. So as people come up the stairs to the front porch, you could hear the footsteps approaching. You know, I'm from Detroit. Immediately, you know, it's dark outside. You're like, whoa, wait, what's going on? But,
Yeah.
you know, everything happened so fast. You literally, it was boom from the door crashing in. And then you just hear people screaming. And before, you know, I could react or anybody could react, the bedroom door comes swinging open and there's a person standing there with an assault rifle. So before you can even realize or let the panic set in, there's somebody there with an assault rifle pointed at you.
I can't imagine the adrenaline and that, you're probably wondering, like, where's your son? What's the, the whole thing would be just I don't even know, that you see some of that stuff on TV, but I can't imagine something like that happening in real life, not having any idea at all. I mean, it's different if you would have been in some kind of weird situation or a bar fight or something, and then somebody shows up and does something. You were just in a normal situation, going to bed, getting ready to get up to go to the next day, and all of a sudden an assault rifles. So what's the next steps that happen?
To sort of double back to your question real quick, you asked, as the panic is setting in, my son was on my chest
Oh, wow.
when they came in, and instant reaction, that parental reaction was to
Yeah,
clutch.
protect him. Yeah.
Exactly. So as I went to turn, I went to wrap my arm around him and turn, my back towards the door. I heard the first officer that came through the door. He started screaming, "Baby, baby, baby." And he's like stepped to the side, and a female officer came past him, and she literally like took my son out of my arms with one hand, and with her other hand she pulled me down to the floor. And when she pulled me down to the floor, she handed me off to that first officer, and they drugged me literally by my wrist from the bedroom into the living room where it was more open space. And that's how I was arrested. They didn't tell me what I was being arrested for. I had no idea what had happened in the hours leading up to this. So I was completely, clueless to why all of this was taking place at that particular time. So it's probably the worst nightmare that anybody could
Yeah.
think of. I went to sleep normal. Everything was fine. House full of people. I was good. And then you wake up to something so tragic. Unknowing.
Well, and unknowing, and when do you find out what they're doing to you? Is it happen in the police car? Is it happen at the police station? Because it's a horrific thing that happens.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't find out until I was officially arrested in the back of the car.
Okay.
What's crazy is they had already notified the local media that I was arrested. Prior to me even being arrested, they had already told the media that I was arrested. So as I was being loaded into the back of the car, the person on the radio was talking about me being arrested. And I was completely clueless to, again, what had happened in the hours leading up to this. So I was so confused, and I'm asking, the officers, what's going on? And as we pulled away, the driver says, "Just listen, they're talking about you on the radio." And that's how I found out, what happened. And then once we made it down to the homicide department is when, the officer started talking to me and explaining what had happened, the night before.
So you knew the people that were involved in this the night before situation. As I understand, reading through, there was a good friend of yours that you'd grown up with. He had an affair with your old girlfriend. Is that correct?
My son's mom.
Yeah,
the one that was in the house with me. Yeah.
So there was, obviously from what I get from reading, it's two friends that kind of went at each other as you would, two really good friends. And then you guys kind of hassled each other back and forth, and then you decided, hey, we're not talking. We're you go your way, you go your way, and we're going to avoid each other. Is that kind of what happened with you guys?
Yes, that is exactly what happened. For all the obvious reasons, there was some friction between us. But despite all of the friction, no one was ever hurt, right? There was some property damage. There was some aggressive words toward each other. There was some aggressive body language when we seen each other in public, but no one was ever hurt. No one was ever harmed in any kind of way. There was never any violence done to either of us. And eventually we got to a place where, we just decided, just stay away from me. That came about by the influence of people around us, right? Some of the older people, the people that cared about us both, set us down both and talk to us, hey, listen, you guys are tripping. So once we had that tongue lashing from the people around us, we both kind of came to that conclusion, what, they're right. We need to just stay away from each other.
Right.
And that was the conclusion we came to.
Wow. So if I understand what happened that night that you got accused of, and they never dropped it, is that there was someone that showed up in a car, got out, threw a Molotov cocktail, which is really, I guess, a bottle with that the thing at the end, I guess they put a cloth in it so that it catches fire, and then threw it into the house catches fire. There's, I forget how many people in there. And I think I forget how old the baby was, 10 months old or whatever. And then there was another child that died, and I think 3 or 4 people got out of the house. So I think is that kind of how that transpired, as far as how they built that, how that happened?
Yes.
Okay. So when do you know what happened? Like, when did they explain to you, like, we've taken you out of your house, we've arrested you, we've blasted it all over the media? How long is it until are talking about this and you realize that, hey, that somebody's put me in this mess?
It was several hours later. The crime happened just before midnight. I think it was like the report's written at like 11:55 or something is when the call came in. And I didn't actually find out, what I was being officially arrested for until maybe noon the next day. I had been in custody for hours before they actually told me what happened. So I was completely oblivious to the facts leading up to the crime and my arrest. I had no idea that any of that had taken place the night prior. Furthermore, I didn't even know what a Molotov cocktail was. I had never even, the thought never crossed my mind. I'd never been explained, what that was. I had no idea what it was. So that made me even more confused when they told me, this is how the crime happened. I was like, yeah, right. Impossible. I don't even know what that is.
I don't even know how to make one of those. Right.
Exactly. Like what is that? And they, at that point, I think is when they began to sort of lock in on, oh, we may or may not have made a mistake, but we've got them now. By this point, they'd already released to the media that I was in custody. So they had to stick to the story that they'd already told the public.
So how does your mom, dad, siblings, and everybody, when are you able to make contact with them? Are you able to connect with them at all through all those hours of being in this situation, locked up at the police station?
I wasn't able to call someone until I think like later that night after I was arrested. There was a series of events that happened, several different officers that I talked to, quite a few people were involved before I was able to talk to anybody, from my family, related to the incident. But, by that time, I was all over the news at that point. So everybody that knew me was fully aware of what had transpired several hours earlier.
Right. So your parents and everybody that is seeing this on TV, on the radio.
Exactly.
They're just as shocked as you are. And here it is. So obviously you knew at some point, hey, this is really bad. How did you go about getting somebody to defend you?
It was a weird experience, because no one in my family had ever been in any serious trouble before.
Yeah. So
we had no idea what to do, who to talk to, what the difference between a good lawyer and a bad lawyer was. Sure. We had no idea. And what a lot of people don't realize is once you're in the system, everything is based off a time schedule. So, not knowing put us at a disadvantage because we had no idea where to start, right? Counsel was appointed to me. And once he was appointed, that was the first time that I had met a lawyer. He came, he talked to me, and that first interaction is when I tried to explain to him over and over again, like, I have no idea about this crime, anything. I think it took him a minute to believe me, but eventually he came to a conclusion where he knew that I was telling the truth. And by that point, we were already sort of at a disadvantage because of the things that led up to that encounter.
Yeah. Well, and you had the narrative out in the public.
Exactly.
The power of the press, once they take off on that path, is almost an impossible thing to stop, coupled with the prosecutor. You have two of those things going at the same time. A defendant, they always say, you walk into a a courthouse, innocent until proven guilty, but I'm not a big believer of that one. I think people, because they hear things and the narrative is built, if it's a case that people know, people assume that there's no reason why they would have spent this time and brought this person in here if they didn't have reason to believe that they did this. And so I think most everybody thinks that when you walk into a courtroom, and you're proving a negative. And I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings, especially on something like murder. You're you're walking in being charged with a murder, and you can't get a worse crime than that. And you're walking in, and I don't care if they say you're innocent until proven guilty or not. There's a lot of people in that room that think, well, they must have the right guy. They wouldn't have spent all this time bringing him in here and putting this case together.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're taught growing up, right? We're taught to trust the police. We're taught to trust that the system gets it right. We're taught that, the police do their job effectively every single case, right? You mix that in with what we see on TV sometimes. It's really hard for people to get that out of their minds that the police make mistakes. And when you add in, as you said, like the media element, right? The media plays a big role in the way that the system processes people, because the narrative that the media is telling is that they have the appropriate suspect in custody already. So, they leave no doubt for people that don't know the difference. They leave no doubt that the right person has been arrested. So journalism definitely plays a heavy role in the influence in the way people view the system, for sure.
It does. And it's very hard for them to make a U-turn, both of them. Both the prosecutor or the media, they have a very hard time making that U-turn once they put themselves out there. If I remember right, Ken, this stuff happened fast. I mean, you went in, and correct me if I'm wrong, was it like 6 months later that you were in the courtroom being sentenced to life in prison? Did it happen that fast?
Yes, it was actually less than 6 months. It was 5 months.
Less than 6 months. That's even more unbelievable.
Yeah, it was so I was arrested on May 19th, and I was found guilty on September 21st. By October 12th, I had been sentenced on October 12th, 2005. I was sentenced to 2 natural life sentences plus 40 to 60 years. 2 days after that, I was shipped off to the Michigan Department of Corrections.
Wow. And I mean, for some of those who know that have listened to this program, Marvin Cotton Jr., Darrell Wood Sr., Ken Nixon, I think there's like 36 or maybe more now, because of the I think it's called the conviction. It's the Wayne County Conviction Integrity Unit, and working with other people on the Innocence Project, have released that many people or overturned that many convictions of wrongly convicted people in the system of Michigan. And one thing I wanted to bring up is, well, let's back up a little bit. That happened so fast. When you went and you knew you were going to trial, how did you feel about your representation? What was happening? What was, because that's not a lot of time to prepare for something that you're going to trial for. How were you feeling?
Panicked. Panicked, uneasy, unsure. All of these things are running through my head because I didn't know the process, right? I've never been introduced to the process of going through the system. And for my first time to ever have to go through the system for it to be a murder case, I was terrified. I was feeling extremely uneasy because, as a person that's innocent, I don't think anybody could ever feel like you've got your representation is doing enough, right? As long as I'm locked in this cage for something that I didn't do, I never felt like he was doing enough. I didn't know the difference between enough and not enough. But in my head as a kid, that level of unsurety that comes with facing the murder conviction is something that it kind of leaves you in a space of so much uncertainty. My life was literally being handled by someone else, and every decision that he made was for my life. I had no control over what was happening. I had no say-so in what was happening. I had no understanding of what was happening. it was a difficult thing to deal with.
Did you take the stand in the trial?
No, I was advised against it. My attorney at the time, I want to say that he was doing the best that he could, but I don't know the difference between the best that he could
I get
and not.
that.
Right. So I felt like he was doing what he could. Of course, naturally, do I feel like he could have done more? Absolutely. Right. I was sent to prison for a decade and a half for a crime I didn't commit. So there's always room for improvement when that happens. But it's a difficult. It's hard for me to say that he wasn't doing his best at that particular time based off of the information that was provided to him, right? All this information that got me out was stuff that we uncovered later on that he wasn't provided with at the time of trial.
Which everybody probably hears at one time or the other. Exculpatory evidence is supposed to be turned over to the defense so that they're looking at the same information that the prosecutor is, and time again, doesn't happen. There's a interesting, I think I just watched the other night, it's called The Innocence Man, that John Grisham, it's a Netflix series. And these guys just didn't turn it over. I mean, and they even did it one step further. The police, they kept a big pile of stuff, and then they turned some over to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor then turned even less over to the defense. So they even had a system with that they finally uncovered, years later. But it's the problem with that whole system is, Ken, is that how do you know? How do you know if you're getting everything? I mean, you finally found out, because you continue to uncover what you didn't have, but you don't know when you're in a situation like that if you have all the information that was supposed to be turned over to you that would be helpful to your defense.
Yeah, I mean, the defense is always at a disadvantage when you're relying on the other side to provide you with the information necessary for you to be effective. I think the system as it's designed right now, it puts every defendant at a disadvantage. As long as the government has full control of the information, then you're at a disadvantage because there's no incentive for them to turn it over to you. That's just the reality of the system, right? They have no incentive to give you what's necessary for you to win. So I think, those risks are heightened even more when it comes to capital crimes such as murder, armed robbery, those attempted murder. They have even more incentive to withhold information to make sure that they secure the win.
Right, they get their guy. Right.
Exactly. It's a difficult situation to be in, and for someone, again, as someone that's innocent, to have to go through that process, how do you rectify that in your mind that they're cheating to win? Literally, they're cheating to win.
Yeah, and you're already in a bad situation. And
exactly.
then you're not getting all the information you need to defend yourself. How long did the jury, once everything in the closing arguments, how long did you have to wait to hear your fate?
The jury deliberated for I think 2 days, almost a full 2 days before they came back with the verdict. Yeah.
I can't even imagine waiting 2 days to find out if you're going to go to prison forever.
I was terrified. Those 2 days were longer than probably every day prior to them. Because you never know. You never know.
Okay, so Ken, you walk into the room, they call you back in, they say the jury's decided, they've made it, and you stand before the judge and they read off that it's guilty, and then you're sentenced, and this is your life. What does that feel like? I
was numb, actually, like completely numb to everything that was happening in court. It's sort of like a blank space. Once that first guilty verdict came out, it was just nothing else mattered at that point, right? The first charge was murder. And I'd already, you can't get any worse than the life sentence. So everything else that came after that was a blur. It had no meaning to it whatsoever. I was still busy trying to process the first guilty verdict and didn't even hear the other ones.
Man. Okay. I want to unpack the whole thing of you going into prison, how you basically came to you understanding the law and never giving up, and on your 14th year, being picked up, and the Innocence Project helping you. But I want to real quick take a break here, recognize our other sponsor here, AaronDuncan.net. Are you in a crisis? We're talking about crisis right here at this podcast. Well, Aaron Duncan, that's what he lives in. He is known as the trauma surgeons for a crisis. They make bad news go away. They work in corporate scandals, high-profile litigation, legal investigations, prosecutions. To be in the public eye in the 21st century is to experience a crisis. No longer a question of whether a crisis will strike. It's a question of whether you will be prepared when it does. What does Aaron do? Well, he helps you with crisis management, crisis communication, media relations, reputation management. He does prison consulting, coaching, helps with discovery with all the stuff that the attorneys might not want to read that'll help your case. So for a confidential consultation regarding crisis or reputation management, email Aaron W. Duncan at gmail.com, or text him or phone call 636-236-5071, AaronDuncan.net, for the guy that'll help you get your crisis resolved. Okay, Ken, you find out you've got 2 life sentences plus another 40, 60 years just to top it off. They immediately take you. Here's something that I was talking to my wife about last night that I think a lot of people don't even really contemplate. But like when I was reading through your stuff, I'm thinking, this is just a normal guy, and he's thrown into this world, and he has to figure it out immediately while he's in jail. Where does he go? Who does he talk to? And then you get sentenced to life. What people I don't think contemplate is you're not going to a camp. You're not going to some place, that might be an easier. You're a murderer, convicted of murder, wrongly accused, innocent man, going into the toughest place that they can send you. I can't even imagine walking out of your world as a dad, starting a business, a 19-year-old kid that's already bought a house, that's getting his life started, and the next step that you take is being put in the worst violent situation as a wrongly convicted murderer. How do you walk into that?
Totally confused. Totally confused. It took me months to really process what was happening. I don't, probably the first 6-7 months being inside, I didn't even come out of my room. Besides to shower and use the phone, I didn't even come out. It was just, it took me a while to really process what was happening. I couldn't understand how the system could get it so wrong, right?
Yeah.
We're not talking about a drug case or a jaywalking case, or armed robbery. We're talking about something that literally ensured me death inside of a cage for a crime that I had no concept of, no understanding of how to commit. So going into prison, there's all sorts of fears that are running through your mind. What we hear on TV about prison and what we hear in the media about prison. All of those thoughts are running through your mind as a kid, right? I was a kid at that point. So, I'm walking into a situation where what can be considered all of society's worst are here. And it took me a while to really understand what was happening. And to this day, I still don't understand why, but it's just it's so overwhelming and consuming to be in the situation that, one, I don't understand. Two, now I'm in a jungle, literally a jungle where your guard is up, paranoia is up at all times. It's hard to sleep because you don't know, who you're in a room with or what's going to happen the moment the door opens. It's it's a horrible environment.
And Ken, did they know of you as you came in? I'm thinking that you probably weren't anonymous when you entered into that prison, because your case was probably something that had been around on TV and other places. Did people know of you as you walked through those gates?
There were a few people that recognized me from the media, from the newspapers. There were a few people as I walked in. Yeah.
Yeah. So looking at life in prison, but knowing that you're an innocent man, you know, I was reading some of your stuff that you would just like try to consume everything, you know, whether you're reading about how to get in touch with people or watching things on TV and trying to get in touch with them and reading newspapers and all these things. At that point, were you were you on your own doing your thing, or were you working with other people that were like-minded trying to help you get out of there?
At that point, I was still just kind of doing my own thing. You know, I was trying to get adjusted to the environment. So I wasn't really keen on meeting new people.
Yeah.
Just, you know, my street senses from Detroit tell you, you know, you're not, it's not good to be the friendliest person around, right? You don't want to open yourself up to become prey to somebody else's nonsense or tactics. So, you know, I spent a lot of time by myself trying to figure things out, you know, not knowing what I didn't know, right?
Yeah.
Not trusting the people around me for all the obvious reasons. So I
Right.
stayed to myself for majority of the time I was there.
So because how did you do your time in there? If you're doing it by yourself, because everybody does their time differently, you know, that's prison. You know, but I always say that there's a real big difference between how people do their time. There's people who are victimized and become a victim and they just kind of curl up in a corner and give up. And then there's the survivors that you can almost see it like a divide in prison, that these people are trying to get by, however they're trying to get by, however much time they have, they're doing their time differently. Did you feel like that you were getting institutionalized in prison, or did you feel like Ken Nixon?
Probably neither. I tried my best to not succumb to the environment. I spent a lot of time really trying to educate myself and better understand the system and how I could fight for my freedom.
Let's talk about that a little bit, though, Ken. How did you do that?
Literally by staying as busy as I possibly could. I would bury myself in as much positivity as I could, any programming that I could sign up for, any classes that I could take, any time that I could spend in the library, any time I could spend reading and just kind of mentally escaping the environment around me. That's what I did. I tried to subscribe to as many books, not books, newspapers, magazines, anything that I can get my hands on that would help me mentally escape. I tried to do.
It's just, and I'm sure you saw all the bad stuff. I mean, you're in that bad prison, which murderers go to. That had to be a lot.
Absolutely. It takes a toll on a person. I was just having a conversation just recently with a therapist, and you know, prison is prison, right? It is violent. You know, you never know what the next moment could bring. You never know what the next day could bring. You never know what the next shift could bring. You know, and it's yeah, you're absolutely correct. You know, 1 minute everything can be fine, and the next minute there could be a riot breakout. You know, there's all sorts of death associated with prison. You know, after seeing so much of it, I kind of became numb to it. Like it's a part of prison. Like there's no question about whether or not prison is violent. I saw violence on every level, and it you know, you, in order to survive, you kind of learn to turn certain emotions off because you can't identify with certain things.
Yeah. How did, because I meant to ask you this, when this happened to you and you got sentenced, you went to prison, your parents, siblings, once you go in, what is that like? Or are you getting visits? Are you staying connected to the outside world? Like what's going on in that part of your world?
Yeah, everybody, for the most part, my siblings were young when I went in. My brother right up under me, I was 19, he was 18, and then I had some younger siblings that were 13. when I went in. So they didn't quite fully understand what was happening. My mom and my stepdad, everybody stayed engaged. Everybody stayed, a part of the process. People process things differently, so it wasn't that anybody fell off, right? Some people, needed a break. That going into the system, especially, I can only imagine the guilt that both of my parents felt, feeling like they were helpless in this situation. And again, we're not talking about, yeah, exactly. We're not talking about something that is a light sentence, right? It's not a 6-month sentence. This is it. This is the rest of your life. Right. And, they were completely helpless. So, for them, I think they took it really hard. My family, though, they did really good. I continue, I got visits throughout the course of my incarceration. Lots of family support. Friends that I grew up with, there were quite a few that stayed with me the entire time of my incarceration. So my incarceration, I would say, wasn't as difficult as some of the other people around me, but I did have a lot of support.
Yeah, that's huge. It's a difference maker, because a lot of people don't, and those guys are just walking alone, doing their bit inside. They're on their own and not connected to the outside world at all. And I think that when that happens, I think you fall deeper into that world, because freedom becomes so far removed from anything that you're connecting to. So the Western Michigan University Cooley Law School Innocence Project gets on your case. How does that happen?
It happened by quite a few different ways. So there was actually an article in 2018 that came out. Some journalism students from Medill Justice Project got approval from the professor to do my case as a class project. Okay. They did a very, very thorough investigation. They came here, I think, a total of either 4 or 6 days. They talked to a laundry list of people associated with the case. And throughout the course of their investigation, they came up with these documents that have been withheld from previous counsel. They wrote the story about it, their class project, and not long after, it was front page of the Detroit Free Press, which is the largest, oldest newspaper in the state of Michigan. And once I made front page news, it got a lot of attention from the innocence community. Shortly after that, I was already in communications with Cooley Innocence Project. My lawyer at that time, the lawyer assigned to my case at that time, was a lady named Lori Montgomery. And she really, really believed in my case. She believed in my innocence. And she fought for me really hard to be accepted. She eventually got the approval, and that's how they ended up taking on my case.
Wow. And that's what it takes, though. I mean, you had a class, and it's crazy that they were able to uncover that information enough that they could get it into the press, and then you find an advocate that pushes your case. How does the Wayne County Conviction Integrity Unit, how did they get into your world? Did they combine forces?
Yes. So a part of the agreement between Lori and I was that once she took on my case, they had a grant that was granted to them by the federal government, and the grant allowed
that. It's like $400 some odd thousand, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The grant allowed them to work in tandem with the Conviction Integrity Unit for Wayne County, okay, which was first in the nation. It had never been done before, and it was unheard of prior to them being granted it. The grant allowed them literally to communicate with each other on cases that were from Wayne County. So our agreement was that I would be the first case to be utilizing this grant. That's how they got involved. Lori, the Innocence Project did their own, after the article came out, they did their own independent investigation to verify what was, in the article. We also did some DNA testing on the remains of the Molotov cocktail. The DNA came back inconclusive. So from there, it was a matter of verifying the information that had been written about in the newspaper article. They independently verified it. Once they independently verified it, they went to the conviction integrity unit and said, hey, we've got this information. We know it's true. We verified where it came from. What do you think? The conviction integrity unit also did their own independent investigation, and they also verified the information to be true, where it came from, the origins, who was responsible for it. And not long after that, I was released.
Wow. What? let's go back a little bit on that, Ken, because I'm wondering, like, all this is happening while you're in this maximum security prison, and now you've got this advocate out there. Now you've got some Innocence Project money. The integrity unit gets involved. Where's your head at with all that? Are you thinking, oh my God, this is so great, I'm going to get out of here? Or, oh my God, I have such bad luck, this is not going to go anywhere?
I think it was a little bit of both. So prison kind of makes you skeptical about everything. So a part of me, right around the time that the journalism students decided to take on the case, I started to feel like the energy was shifting, because for so long prior to that, I wasn't able to get anybody to listen to me.
Let's talk about that, Ken. I mean, it had been what, 14 years? I mean, how long had you been in? I mean,
I had been
in like 5 years. You'd been in over a decade of prison.
Yeah. I had been in quite a long time. I want to say it was 12 or 13 years I had been in when they, decided to take on the case.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of no's. I got a lot of rejections leading up to that. So, the natural response is, hope, but at the same time, you're expecting something to not come out the way you want it. And that's kind of the mental space that I was in. But I think as they began to do their investigation and they kept me informed of the things that they were finding, it kind of shifted me a little bit. I felt the energy surrounding my innocence starting to change. Then the article comes out, and then I start to get the entrance of Innocence Projects, and they're coming to the table with the conviction integrity unit. So the energy started to change a lot. It wasn't so negative at that point. Everything surrounding the case seemed to be positive after positive. And I had a good team that was working with me. And as you stated, I knew that throughout the course of my incarceration, I knew that I just needed one person. I just needed one person to believe in me. And, I knew that one person would be able to change the trajectory of the case. And, eventually that one person came about, and it changed everything for me.
So this is going on in prison. You're an innocent man locked behind the walls. Are you talking about this with anybody in there?
No.
I didn't think so.
No, prison is such a negative place. It's not a place to openly share good news, right? Everybody's in such a down and somber mood most of the time that, your good news could create a situation that you weren't hoping for when you decided to vent that day.
Yeah. Well, I even felt like it was uncomfortable. I mean, when I got close to getting out, I didn't even talk about it because, I knew the guys had more time than I had. And there's nothing that's good for, it's good for me, but those guys that are doing more time, how does that make them feel? Every time somebody got released, I was like, I wish that was me. So it is a weird environment. You might have one or two people you can share things with, but you certainly don't share it to very many people because it's a different world in there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think with each person that got out before me, naturally a part of me felt envious, but the other part of me was celebrating as well, because I knew that was one more person off the list.
People get
right?
out.
That's one more person out of my way, right? Now they got a little more resources to focus on what's going on over here. All right, that guy's gone, so start over here. So
I'm next up in line.
I kind of looked at it.
I like that. So how does it happen? Like, what were the steps of you getting out? So everything starts rolling your way. The positive stuff's happening. You've got the Innocence Project and the Integrity Unit working together. Then I'm sure that this has to go before a judge. You have a hearing. I'm assuming that are you part of that hearing?
Yes.
Are you okay?
So I came out during COVID. So
Okay.
they were doing Zoom hearings when I came
Okay.
out. So once we got to the point where I knew what was about to happen, right? It got really weird at that point because I was told that it was going to happen, but I was also told not to tell my family yet either until, you know, we were certain that this was happening. So for probably 2 weeks, you know, I had to keep this to myself, you know, keep it away from everybody. On top of, you know, making sure that I didn't slip and say anything, you know, around me as well.
Sure.
Once we got the court date scheduled, I knew it was going to be on Zoom. And, you know, I knew the time, the date, everything. So the prison took me to literally like a storage closet where they have this camera set up for Zoom meetings. And I'm not exaggerating. It's literally a storage closet with a TV
I
rolled
believe
in.
that. Yeah.
It's on a cart with a TV screwed to the cart, and they plug the TV in and they log you into Zoom court. And I sat through the hearing. And after I sat through the hearing, of course, naturally, I'm like, okay, so what happens next? What's going on now? And my lawyer stayed on after the court hearing concluded, and they explained to me that the judge had to email or fax the information over to the prison for my release. And, you know, that's how the process.
Wow, Ken. I cannot imagine. And the other thing I want to talk about a little bit is because you experienced something that I don't know how bad it could be having COVID restrictions in prison, but I'm assuming, knowing prison, that they took that on themselves to basically eliminate any type of things that prisoners liked just because it was COVID protocol. What was it like being in prison with COVID?
I think that was probably the scariest time of my incarceration. COVID hit the prison system just as my positivity was starting to come about. So, you know, and to be fair, the prisons didn't know how to handle COVID. So
nobody did.
Exactly. Like nobody did. So, you know, what I was seeing, it only increased my fear of what was to come, because 1 minute everything can be fine, and then the next minute, you know, they've got an entire half of a building quarantined because somebody tested positive. And, you know, we're seeing people being taken out, but we're never seeing them come back, right? At some point, the Michigan Department of Corrections decided that they were going to have facilities specifically for quarantining. And then it was segregation areas specifically for quarantining. And once you cleared quarantine, you know, they would ship you off to somewhere else where no one was positive. So, you know, the fear of 1 minute you and I could be sitting next to each other, the very next minute I could see you being escorted out because you test positive, and then I could never see you again.
You never see it again.
I don't know what happened to you. I don't know if you died, they transferred you, nothing. So, you know, that increases the fear of the unknown. And I think the way that the system was handling it only made things worse for us inside, because it's already stressful, you know, being concerned about the violence and the officers and the attitudes all day long. Now you got COVID, right?
Yeah.
And
people being taken away. The only thing I could at all even kind of imagine was we had scabies, which I never really heard of it before, but a guy came in and they shut a whole wing down and kept those guys in there for like a week or two, and they couldn't even leave. I mean, they were literally couldn't leave, and just got and the fear for us was that it was going to come out, whatever scabies was going to come out, and they were just going to shut the whole place down. But I can't imagine COVID, because COVID, like you said, they just take somebody away. You don't see them again. You don't know if they're alive, dead, whatever.
There was a lot of
what's really something, Ken, is that you're right. That was exactly when all the good stuff was happening for you.
Yeah. I mean, to make matters worse, there's a lot of frustration amongst the inmate population because we were being forced to be tested every week, but the staff wasn't being forced to be tested every week, which was confusing to us because
they're the ones going out.
Exactly. They're the ones going out and coming in. We're quarantined from the world. The only way that we can catch it is if they brought it
It's
to
for
us.
somebody coming in, right?
Exactly. So you have us testing as if we're the problem, but you're not making the actual problem do any testing whatsoever. And, you know, it increased the fear, it increased the hostility. I don't know if you know this, but literally a month before I was released, I tested positive.
I did not know that.
Yeah, January 2021, I tested positive. I was released February of 2021.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Did they take you and put you in solitary, or what did they do with you?
Yeah, they quarantined the entire unit. They put us in solitary, which was crazy as well because we literally had bunkies where there was 2 of us in the cell while we both tested positive for COVID. So, you know, I got to see the effects of COVID up close because mine was mild, right? I was fine. I was functional, slight cough, no issue. My other hand was dealing with a way worse case of it. Body aches, cold sweats, you know, just not being able to handle it. So, you know, it was hard to watch him suffering when I could do nothing. The staff weren't doing anything. And it was just hard. And I'm praying that, you know, I survive it because I know what's going on. I can feel
you're supposed to get
coming.
out.
Yeah. And I can feel what's coming. Like, no, not this close. No, like I didn't survive all this time only for COVID to take me out. Like it was horrible. It was stressful.
Oh man, Ken, I can't imagine the stress of that. Well, let's talk about you getting out. I mean, so you get released. I think I've seen the pictures of you got your mask on and pull it down, and you get out. Tell me about it. I just can't imagine, really.
It was super ecstatic moment.
Wasn't
I didn't
that long
believe
ago
it.
either.
No, it was just over 2 years ago. February 18th, 2021. Like I said, we go through the hearing, and by this time, what I didn't know was that I had already made the news. It had already been announced that I was going to be released. So the officers come in the day that I'm supposed to be released. And ironically, my court hearing was at 1 o'clock, shift changes at 2 o'clock. So this little closet that I'm in doing the hearing, it led up to shift change. So as the officers are coming in, everybody's talking about the guy that's supposed to be released from prison today. And most of them, you know, had known me from being there. So, you know, they're looking around, and to the facility's credit, they made sure that I had all of my stuff as quickly as possible. They made sure that I was prepared to leave. And one of the things that happened for me, I don't know that it's happened for anybody else, the deputy warden, literally the third in command at the facility that I was at, walked me out to the car. He helped process me out. He helped process me out, and he openly asked, could he help, you know, carry my belongings to the car? And he did. He did. Wow. He walked me out to the car. He walked me out to my innocence lawyers. And, you know, it was a moment. As I walked out, they actually had my family move to a different location because they didn't want a lot of commotion on the prison ground. So I went to a car where my lawyers were waiting, and we drove around a corner to where my family was. And as we pulled up in the parking lot, there's this big crowd. It's a snowstorm. There's media out here. And, you know, it was an amazing feeling to step out of that car and to see, you know, I walked into a sea of love, literally, just tons of people standing there waiting for me. And, you know, my sons were there, other exonerees were there, guys that I had never met before. We're sitting there in the parking lot to welcome me home. And, you know, lawyers, Lori Montgomery, you know, she was there. She had moved on to a different job at that point, but she was there. She made it her business to be there. And that meant the world to me, you know.
That's so cool.
You know, it's such a humbling feeling to know and that your innocence had finally been proven after all this time, after all this fight. You know, someone finally took the time to listen to you.
Can't imagine. I mean, the feeling of that, being wrongly accused of such a horrible crime and just not giving up on yourself and keeping with it, and then finding an advocate, and then the school. I mean, the school that did that and got it published, and then all of a sudden you're off and running. It's just a really cool story, Ken. And what I really like, and I want to kind of talk about what you're doing now, because it had to be a real adjustment to get out. I mean, 3 years, 5 years, 14 years, 16 years. How was it for you getting out? The elation obviously is fantastic, and you're an innocent man that wrongly accused, and everybody knows it now. What about reentry?
It was definitely different. The world was different. It was a huge transition for me. Technology had advanced so much that I wasn't prepared for what I was walking into. Reentry was probably one of the most difficult parts of the transition. Again, I came home in the middle of COVID, so there was no such thing as being able to just go and
that
ask
had to be
for
weird.
Like I didn't know that the world had transformed into this at that point. I thought things were still normal. People would just go to the Secretary of State, and you just go and ask for your vital documents. That's what I thought. I had no idea that the process would be so difficult. Just a few examples. When I came home, because I was an Innocence Project client, the Innocence Network as a whole from all over the world, they send you, there's these funds set up where they send you money to help you get back on your feet. The problem was I couldn't cash the checks because I didn't have a bank account. I couldn't get a bank account without an ID. I couldn't get an ID without a birth certificate. I couldn't get a birth certificate without a social security card. You can't get an ID without having two of the other. And it was just like so confusing. And, the difficulty.
Which is why you're such a great voice for what you're doing, by the way.
I mean, I'm trying. And, you have to make these things relatable for people to understand that, I try to make it as simple as possible when I'm telling the story, because this stuff is real. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I had a lot of help. I had tons of people in my corner, and none of us could figure out how to navigate even the most basic of government necessities. One of the stories that I tell about my Social Security card is, I mean, everybody knows the federal government has its own issues, but I still to this day can't understand how I ordered a watch from overseas, and that watch was delivered to me within 3 days. The Social Security office was literally 2 blocks from the house that I was living in, and it took 6 weeks for me to get it. How is a piece of paper that is walking distance from my home, how does that take longer than it does to order something from another country and have it delivered to your doorstep? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. and it's like, I don't get it, and there were so many difficulties. State IDs, you can't do anything without identification. Literally, I was an unknown citizen in this country the moment I walked out of prison. I was a baby.
How weird is that?
And prison gives you an ID, but nobody respects that ID.
No,
literally nobody.
No, it scares people.
They kicked me out of a bank with that ID. Literally, security told me to leave because it was an invalid identification. I tried to go to another state agency. I tried to go to the Secretary of State. They told me that ID wouldn't work for them. They literally used my high school ID as opposed to my Michigan.
And it's a state issued ID card.
Yes.
It just comes from the prison.
Listen, I was there when they printed my high school ID. Like, it was printed in the closet of a room at my high school, and they took that before they took something that was issued to me by a prison, a state agency. And it's the process is just way too difficult and burdensome.
Let's talk about what you're doing now, because I mean, you're doing good stuff. And can you kind of let everybody know what you're doing?
Criminal justice reform is something that's personal to me for all the obvious reasons. I am, the president and chairman of the organization of Exonerees. This is an organization that I co-founded along with a group of other exonerees. Prior to my release from prison, this organization didn't exist. We didn't start this organization with reform in mind. We started it as a brotherhood, as a way to bond, and keep each other focused, help each other through difficulties. But we quickly realized that I wasn't the only person suffering from a vital documents issue or a bank account issue or a healthcare issue. We were all having the same problems. And that's where we sort of bonded in that injury, and learning to navigate those processes. We kind of came to the decision that we need to fix this stuff so that the people that come after us don't have to go through the things that we had to go through. So we set out on a mission to really restructure the way reform looks for exonerees. And, now just less than 2 years later, we've built in all sorts of programs for, vital documents, bank accounts, financial advisors, transportation, healthcare, housing, all the things that didn't exist 2 years ago are now readily accessible for guys as they walk out of prison. Beyond that, we also travel the country advocating for other innocent people, which is, how you and I met.
Hey, yep, that's how we met.
We've traveled to multiple different states, advocating for other innocent people that are still fighting for their freedom. And in those cases, we work to bring as much awareness as possible to the person that's suffering. We try to remind people that there's multiple victims when it comes to a wrongful incarceration.
Ken, I think it's a really big deal what you guys do on that traveling group, because talking about an exoneree is one thing, but seeing your face, hearing your voice, and knowing that you really exist, and going to these other places and showing people that, yes, it really happens. You really can get put in prison and be wrongly accused. It's such a big deal what you guys do and show up at these different places, because it really does give a voice and a face to this unbelievable situation. But I think that if you weren't doing that, there's less of an impact. By you guys being there, I think you create such more of a big impact of people understanding that this is real. This guy that's sitting in that courtroom. It really could have happened because I'm one of them.
Yeah, I think that was, we kind of came to that conclusion. The importance of it was not befallen on us, being physically present, because each and every one of us understood how it felt to be in the courtroom with no support.
Yeah.
How it felt to be trying to navigate a process that with limited understanding of what was happening to you, for you, around you, about you, right? All of these decisions are being made, and the only person that can't speak and doesn't have a voice in that situation is the person going through it. And, people have a tendency to look past that fact. When you're arrested, from the moment you're arrested, you never get an opportunity to speak for yourself, ever. Right? There's cops speaking for you. There's prosecutors speaking for you. There's attorneys speaking for you. The judge is speaking for you. The jury is speaking for you. At no point does anybody ask the actual wrongfully convicted person how they feel, what they're thinking, what's going through your mind. At no point do you have a voice when your life is on the line. Us understanding that, because we've been through it, felt like it was important, extremely important, that we be that person's voice, right? We give a face to what some people don't think exists or think happens.
Yeah, and have a hard time with it.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure that our presence was impactful in a way that it makes people understand this is not just for TV. We are real people, and this happens every single day. So, our group, it's sort of a no-brainer when I make that call and it's like, yo, we got a court hearing that we need to attend. We have to figure out how to transport that many people that are volunteering more than anything. Especially when we have time to plan, when we know in advance it's happening. That's a totally different situation where, I might find out today that we've got a hearing on Monday. Some people may not be able to juggle their schedules as much, but the impact of being present, I think it goes past what most people understand.
Yep. Without a doubt. And, you lending your voice to so many of these different things for previously incarcerated people, it's such a big deal because, some people don't have a strong voice, But one of the things, that's, if you read, you can go and read about Ken. There's a lot to read about him, but he's got a great voice. He's a smart guy. I think you're going political science and going into law, which I'd love to have you on the defense side of the table, knowing what you know, living what you've lived. What a great profession for you to have, to use that experience of yours to help others. If going out to the listeners out there, Ken, it's so incredible what you've lived through. What do you think is the biggest takeaway through all of your journey?
The system is hugely flawed, and the lack of accountability is just astounding to me. I'm not one of those people that believes like defund the police or abolish, the system. I'm not one of those. I'm not foolish enough to say that. I definitely believe we need police. I also believe we need accountability. I think there's a huge difference between making a mistake and doing something deliberately. And we know for a fact, provable fact, that there are instances of wrongful convictions where the police and or the prosecution involved in that wrongful conviction did something knowingly, right? They intentionally did something to send an innocent person to prison, and there's no accountability. There's no accountability. Yeah, lawsuits, people win lawsuits all day, every day, but lawsuits do nothing to change the system. They just pad the pockets. Most people don't understand that even when you do win a lawsuit, it's an insurance claim, right? The city, the insurance company pays it off. It's not like that officer is affected in any kind of way. The reality is what happens is that officer and or that prosecutor retires with a full pension intact. Nothing ever happens to that person, no matter how many lives they wreck or ruin in the process. They still go on with their lives as if nothing ever happened. That's the biggest takeaway for me, that there's no accountability for some of the bad actors within the system.
Which, I think creates the passion that you have to help change it and fix it. And, one of the things that you about Ken Nixon is he's a fixer and he's a problem solver. And thank God you're out to be able to do that, because we need people like you on the outside fixing and finding solutions, because it's a big problem. And, I think maybe there's a little bit more focus on it than there has been maybe 20, 30 years ago, but there's so much that needs to be done. But your voice out there, Ken, is fantastic. And thanks so much for making the time today. I want to tell everybody, if you want to go, I know I say this all the time, but on Apple, if you leave a review, it really helps the show. It pumps up the volume of how they promote the show. So if you want to do that, if you're on your phone, there's 3 little lines up at the top. You just drop that down. Actually, that's to follow the show. To leave a review, you just scroll down and find the reviews and hit click a review. Go to BrittCassidy.com, leave me a message. I love to go back and forth with everybody. And if you're needing a book out there, I wrote one, Nightmarish Success. It can be found on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart. And this guy here needs to write a book. Ken Nixon needs to write a book. I'll be looking for his book. As I used to say to everybody when I was typing my emails back and forth in prison, stay strong, and I'll do the same. Ken Nixon, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.